Welcome to this second part in my series for Workers and Resources Soviet Republic for new players. And in this video, we're going to be just taking a look at the user interface. Now, the reason I want to do a whole video on just the interface, one is that I don't want to confuse issues. The second point is that there's a lot of different features within the interface which can be useful and some can be a little bit confusing. And the final point is that one thing that I do know has been a bit of confusion based on the comments on my series is that there are often several ways to do the same action within the game, and which method you use is totally a matter of personal choice, but I know it does cause a little bit of confusion. Now, the format of this video is that we're going to have go through the top bar, then the sidebar over here, and then go across the bottom. And then I'm going to talk very briefly about the options in the bottom right hand corner here. But if you want to know more about the option, how these options actually work, I suggest watching the next video in the series when we were actually getting down to actually starting to do something on this map, which we chose in the first part. So we're going to start up in the top left here, and what you can see is that the game has two currencies. The right left hand one is rubles. Now this is your primary currency because obviously we're playing a Soviet Republic and we're starting on the border here, and all purchases from here will be in rubles, but every game gives you a bit of a cash reserve in dollars, which you can then use if by some chance that you happen to be near a NATO post. But there's also a way that you can use dollars when you're first setting up your economy, which we'll be talking about in the next video. Now, if you put the cursor over each one of these, what you will get is a breakdown of the current state of your economy, or more of an overview actually. And the way it works is that the left-hand column is the current month. So what you can do is, if you feel that you're losing money or you're spending too much, you can come onto this and it will tell you. So at the moment, this is strangely, it's actually telling us that we're losing 1,219 rubles for foreign workers when we haven't actually spent anything. So I'm not exactly sure where that came from. And then the right-hand column is the previous month. So again, it gives you a very quick comparison about how things are going. And this is actually split down into resources, import, export. So you can see what you're importing, what you're exporting in cash terms. The same applies to vehicles, how many vehicles you're buying. And then if you're in the late game, how much money you're getting from the export of vehicles. Now, foreign manpower is something more related to when you're playing in realistic mode, because what that means is you're bringing in foreign workers from the customs post, which is down here. And what you'll see is there's available foreign workers in here. So what this is actually telling you is how much money you're spending on foreign workers. And the next one down is immigrant invitations. This is only really happens when you populate a building, when you bring in immigrants. And then the bottom one is tourism income, once you've got your tourist industry up and running. Now the dollars has exactly the same format, because you can, what you do with respect to rubles, you can also do with respect to NATO, as long as you, of course, you've got access to a NATO customs shed. So moving across now, the 1st of January is our start date. Now what you'll see underneath is a little row of dots, and what these dots represent is the progress of the day. So if you've got the day-night cycle on, you can look up very quickly and see when it's just about to get dark. When you're playing with daylight on all the time like I am, this is not particularly that useful. And moving into the center, you see we've got the game's logo, and just below the logo we've got some down chevrons. If you click on those, what this does is open up a keyboard shortcut bar. Now this is got 10 positions per level, and it's actually got 10 levels. And what you can do is go through like by clicking these, or if I open this up, what you'll see, you can also go forward and back by pressing F5, F6, and this actually does go down to 10 levels. Now I'll be completely upfront, I've never used more than the first level, simply because if you've got to click through to get to something and then press the respective keyboard number on the keyboard, it just seems a bit cumbersome. But what I do have is some key tools across the top. The other thing I've also done, I don't know if you notice, if I press F6 again, you see I've got the same one in position 1, because that is one of my favorite keyboard shortcuts, and this is Construction Office Assignment Tool, which is actually on the left hand side. I'll talk a little bit more about how that actually works. Now the way you can add or change this the actual hotbar is by, if you want to clear a slot to add something new, you've got to put on there, and then you've got to press remove there. And if you actually come there and then to add something, it's quite straightforward. You just click on that and just click in and click back. And as you can see along here, I've got my probably the main ones I use is the delete tools when I remember, because of course you can get to the delete tool down here as well. So this is an example of how you can do different things using the same way. And what I tend to do when I'm playing is actually have the bar minimized, so that all I can do is just press that and get that up in there. So this is a very useful toolbar, especially if you're really into using hotkeys. And I must admit, I'm not the greatest fan of hotkeys. Moving across to the right, what you've got is the game speed. You've got pause, normal speed, and faster speed. Again, if you press the space bar, you can turn the game, pause and unpause the game. And again, if you press the space bar and then press it again, you can pause and unpause the game without actually using these controls. The next one across is the wind speed and weather conditions. What you also get if you activate the seasons mechanic, you also get the temperature here. Now, to be honest, the weather system only comes in when you've got the day-night cycle. When you're playing with the day-night cycle deactivated, probably the bigger interest is the wind speed, because if you're playing with wind turbines, the wind turbines in the game will actually decrease in efficiency if the wind speed drops. So so what that means is there's an element of risk when you're using wind turbines, and therefore it doesn't really pay. I mean, wind turbines are great if you've got an isolated area that's not populated, like say a gravel pit or something like that, or a farm. Then you can use wind turbines, but I would never recommend relying on wind turbines in a populated area. Anyway, so I'm digressing a little bit. Sorry, apologies. Now, moving across next, what you've got here is a breakdown of your population. The top bar is workers, and what you see is you've got kind of three groups of workers. From an education perspective, you've got uneducated workers, workers with low education, and workers with high education. Now, when you open this up, the figure that you're really interested in is uneducated workers, because uneducated workers don't work, and that could cause a bit of a problem. Now, the next section down is the profile of your children. And to be honest, the actual 0 to 6, 7 to 15, 6 to 20, 16 to 21 is an interesting statistic, but it's not one that you need to worry about too much. The one in this section that you need to keep an eye on is 21s and above without their own flat. Over 21s don't add much to your economy, and what they do is consume resources with little return. So if you're getting a big build up of over 21s, that means that you need to build more accommodation. And then at the bottom you've got others, which is 21-year-olds who are studying at university. And not 100% sure. I think that is the number of over 21s who are actually in university halls of residence. The next one down is prisoners, it only becomes relevant if you're playing with crime and justice mechanic enabled. Then the bottom one is how many tourists in your economy as well. So moving across to the next one, this one is more an overview of what your population is actually doing. So again, at the top one, it gives you a breakdown of unemployed workers, and it's probably worth mentioning that workers who are actually in jobs and functioning normally aren't included in this list. But what you get here is a breakdown of why you've got unemployed workers. And you can see it goes low education, small children means you don't have enough kindergartens, no workplace means that you've got a population is bigger than the current available jobs, or the workers can't get to the vacancies, which is quite an important one. Due to sickness is more of an indication of the health of your population. And then the next one down, it says adults who cannot study. It says elementary school, university. If these figures start to build up, it means you don't have enough educational facilities, especially schools. And of course, if adults can't go to elementary school, they can't get a basic education. So that again, it's something you do need to watch. And then the next section is children who can't study. So the two middle sections are interconnected. And then down the bottom one where it says others, it says prisoners who are not working. This is a fact that if you're playing with crime and justice enabled and you've got people in prison, you can use prison buses to put them into the labour force. So that out the way. Moving across to the next one. What this is a health overview, and what you see, it says satisfied, which means basically they're getting enough food, because if they don't get enough food, they get unhealthy. Sport has a certain amount of impact on their health as well. So then that gives you a percentage of how many people are enjoying sport. And the one below that is pollution, which obviously if you've built an industry near houses and that pollution is spreading into the residential areas, then that pollution will make your population sicker. The average lifespan will fluctuate according to the overall health of your population. And I think what actually happens is that when someone falls ill, it reduces their lifespan, and then that affects the average lifespan. Now, the one on the right hand side at the top, alcohol addiction, is an interesting statistic. This shows how addicted to alcohol your population is. Bear in mind that these figures are for your whole population. And alcohol was curious in the sense that alcohol makes people happy, but it also makes them sick. So part of the game mechanic is trying to get a reasonable balance between that. Radioactivity, you can always ignore until you start building your first nuclear reactors. And the bottom one there, it says can't visit doctor, which means that you don't have enough medical facilities. And if someone falls ill and they can't get to a doctor or get to hospital, then that has a more protracted effect than whether they're actually treated. So moving across now, we get a breakdown of what's affecting happiness. And it says clothing quality there. What I will include here, going back to here, is that if people aren't getting food, that will make them unhappy as well. Sport enjoyment is another happiness factor. And then you've got culture, which is the cinema. And then on the right hand side, you've got government loyalty, which is a mechanic. The more loyal they are to the state, the happier they are. And again, and here you got confirmation with alcohol addiction. See, that's why it's in both listings. Religion in this game is a little bit eccentric. It's because you can't actually build churches, well, not without using mods, and therefore religion only really comes into the game if you start on a populated map, because most populated maps actually start with a church or a cathedral. Now, the two values at the bottom, radios and television, directly relate to the resource in the game called electronics. And what the game does is give the residents in your buildings radio and television. And the more radios and televisions you've got, the more you can spread propaganda across the map. But it's a very subtle mechanic, so don't worry about it too much. So that is the top bar finished. And while we're actually up here, I'll just mention that once the game starts rolling, you will start getting a icon appear here, which is the in-game messages. Now, this game can get a bit verbose with the messages, and what you'll get is warnings related to whether buildings not working and whether you've got shortages in say, like there's no power. It will also tell you global events, so this is where your global events will appear if you know it. You'll also get notifications when new vehicles become available and when vehicles are, and I think you also get a thing that says last chance to buy if a vehicle's just about to expire. So this can get quite verbose, but if you get big piles of messages, there is a way that you can just wipe them all out in one go. So moving to the left hand side, what we got at the top here is the usual settings menu. Save as, load game, quick game, and below we've got the settings menu, general settings, control settings, gives you all your key activities default. You can actually change this if you highlight one of these and press the relative key. You can change it, so if you've got certain key preferences, you can map it again, but be aware that the game uses a lot of the keys, so be a bit careful which one you chooses. These like scroll sensitivity can affect the and the bars are actually ways that you can adjust the sensitivity of certain controls, like if it's spinning the buildings around a little bit too fast, you can change this to suit your own preferences, and you go save there. Now, the last one here is called game settings. Now, if you watch the previous video, you'll be aware when I was setting the game up, I said that certain things could be switched on and off. And it's worth noting that there are risks associated with switching off some mechanics once you've started building them. So really you want to switch things on and off. But of course, one of the nice things here is the day-night cycle. So if you've built a really cool looking town and you want to see what it looks like at night, you can just flip this through and say, right, I want to run a couple of day-night cycles so that you can actually see what's going on. Now, the next one down is called resort status. This is really something you're going to use in the mid to late game. And you can see it gives a distance from the cursor position, and this is a radius. And it says 1,000, 2,000 meters, all the map. And what this does is if you, say we select 1,000 meters, and if we had an urban area here, it will give you a breakdown of all the resources in this area and the amount that's actually in vehicles, the amount that's in buildings, and the value in rubles and dollars. Now, what this is really useful is if you've got a town in a production area, if you're trying to, and say you've got a shortage of food, but you know that there's lots of food on the map, what you can do is find out where the bottlenecks are, where food is piling up in buildings, and also by looking at vehicles, you can see whether the food or whatever resource is being able to move. Now, this is a dynamic menu. This is the reason why it's blank. It will only show what's available in the range, and it's worth noting that a lot of the overlays and some of these tools work in exactly the same way. So if we go down now to population statistics, this is a slightly more detailed breakdown of the information you get up here. So in this screen, what you get is the actual population, the demographic breakdown. Again, similar to the bar at the top, the one you're always mainly interested in is the over 21s. What you'll get is bars going over here, which means you've got to kind of try and estimate whether the happiness, the satisfaction, health, loyalty, alcohol. So this is all familiar from the top bar. Now, one thing that can cause confusion is that this is actual population, not your numbers of workers. And then you got here is unemployed workers, average productivity. Productivity is a very important mechanic in the game, but I'm not going to go into it in this video. You got the average age, the average lifespan. So again, what this does is it tells you whether you've got a baby boom coming through. Then you've got your education, say uneducated, then you've got education, no education, basic education, university education. This is your levels of electronics, and you can actually see there's computers in here as well. Again, this is often reflected within the building statistics as well. So you can break this statistic down by town if you build a mayor's office, and you can also look at individual buildings and get similar stats. Car owners is personal cars across the map. That again is very much a late game mechanic. And what you can do down here is you've got births, immigration and all that. And what you see is the stats here. And it's possible to, well, we can't do it here, but what you can do is set a range. So if you've got a period of time, this is often very, very useful when you're looking at what happened during a bad winter, where you can see that the births and deaths fluctuate. And probably one of the more interesting mechanics in this game is escapees. Escapees are people who literally just say, I've had enough of your economy, I'm going to leave. And escapees is one way that you can really get into trouble. And this is why it's very important to look after these stats up here. So the next one down is economy and trade. Now, there's a lot of factors to this, and I'm not going to go through this whole menu because I could probably do a whole video on it. But what you get here is a breakdown of your exports, imports going by month. Again, similar as before, you can define a range. What you get here is your gross domestic product. Again, this is more for the late game when you're starting to see how well your economy is doing. Current prices is what you actually gauge by your prices here. Now, what you can get down here is historical data, and what that shows you how prices fluctuate and change. And it's also probably worth noting that this game has an inbuilt inflation mechanic. So these are the prices at the start of the game, but over time these prices will rise for purchases and possibly could even fall from a selling perspective, especially if you start dumping large amounts of materials onto the market. So don't work on the assumption this is fixed. The price will vary over time, and what you can get is a loan in rubles. Now, loans are defined by the size of the economy, but you can borrow up to 1.8 million rubles. You can also get it in US dollars as well. And also what you get here is tourism. This is a breakdown of your tourist activity, how much you're making money, how many, and you can actually see how many tourists died. It's a strange menu actually. So moving down to the next one, this is what you could actually call a finder tool. And the way I normally use it is that, say for example, you want to find, you're looking for all the vehicles. Say you want to upgrade some vehicles and you want to get rid of the old ones. This is the way you can find it. And what you can do is look in ranges or just do the whole map. And that also applies to trains and ships, airplanes, helicopters. Containers is another one as well, that sometimes you can lose containers. But another good tip is, if say you've got a large town and you've got a small building in there, it can act as a building finder for your town. So you set it to the rough size of the town. And what will happen is if you click this, it will list all the building types across the top and then list the buildings. So, and then what you can do is click on the building you're looking for, and then you get the normal building menu open, and then you can just flip straight to it. And the one at the end it says list all city areas. And if I actually click this and I go to the whole map, this is an example of how it works. What this is effectively giving is a list of all the border posts, because we've got no towns. Now, the useful thing about this is that the game, whenever you place a building, the game will create a town zone. And sometimes what will happen is that you can get ones that are very close together, and sometimes because of the small print they can be very difficult to find. So what you can do is use this to actually find the location. So, well, haha, so we've just gone all over there. And what it would, and that means that you can either change it or delete it, but of course we can't delete this because it's actually a customs post. So that is a very useful tool if you've got an irritating place name on the map and you can't find it. You can just find it through here. The next one is a list of all your manually created lines, because in this game you can create either a one-off route for, say, a bus, or you can have 4 or 5 buses working on a line. And this is when this menu is where you actually manage your lines. And I think it's probably the best way to do it. Now, the next one, I'm just going to go back across down to wherever we were. I can't remember where it was now. Let's flip over to near the border. Yeah, here we are. Now, the next one is called Make City. This is a new tool that's was added as part of the Metro update. And the way it works is, say you've got a major building project, or say you want to build a themed town, what you can do is come into here and click there, and what you get the buildings. Now, what you've got to do is resist the temptation to click on them. What you've actually got to do is use the E. You've got to do is click there. What you've got to do is click on this menu, and what you can do is use the Q and E keys to flush through. So this is quite, and you can just build a custom template up there. You can add, say, come into here. You can also add, say, you want a fire station, a hospital. It's just you can just treat it as a palette for laying out an area and putting in buildings. So this is why it's called Make City, and then you can just clear it all when you're finished. It's a way of getting a template. So it's a way of getting up a creation template. In fact, I might use that. What I might do is just demonstrate that when we're actually planning our first town. Now, the next one is a whole series of overlays. And it works very much like the building and finder. When you click on this, what you will get is this one gives you an overview of your town, and you can actually click on the individual items to see it. And the nice one about this is down the bottom here with electricity, because substations can sometimes be a bit difficult to find. If you click on this, it will actually highlight all the substations. Next one across is basically the resources in the area. Now, that's different from the resource stats up here. What this does is show you the resources in an area and how much it is in each area. So it would show you how much resources you've got in a warehouse or in a store, or even when you're in a farm. Next one across is citizens' current locations. This is an overview of say like you're trying to find out where your uneducated workers are congregated. You click this over the map, and what it will do is put little icons over buildings to tell you what it would do is put little icons over buildings to show you where the uneducated workers are. And you've got uneducated workers, workers of lower education, higher education, children, school age, adult, over 21s living with their parents. This is probably the one you use most. Citizens during free time, and tourists. So that's that one. The next one is a similar vein across there. So you've got this one here, this one, and what this will actually do is give you overlays for happiness, food, and everything else as well. And other icons will appear also. If you enable crime and justice, it will give you an overview for crime. Again, this is an overview of vehicles. Again, it's very similar to this one. So this is where I said in the intro that you do get duplication of vehicles. Now the one at the end is buildings. Again, it's a finder similar to this one here. Now this icon here is an overview of power, free flats. This is where you can see whether there's free accommodation. This one gives you an overview of the how much. What this one does is give you a overview of construction sites and tell you how close they're near to finish. When you switch on water, you will get extra icons to give you overlays of water as well. So this is, again, this is a very useful overlay to use to find out what's going on in your economy. So next one down is construction office assignment tool, which I alluded to when I was talking up here. Now this is a way that you can assign groups of specialist construction sites to a single hotkey, and you can see you can have up to 9. So you can see you can have up to 9. I think it says all. It says middle mouse button, select all construction offices from selected constructions. I think this is the one you can use for combinations. But what you can do is build a group of construction officers which can work together that may have specialized vehicles in, and then what you can do is just press the key and then assign say 4 or 5 construction officers to the same job. It's just a kind of nice neat little shortcut with respect to it's just a nice little shortcut when it comes to allocating when you're constructing buildings. Workshop building, well, this is the kind of what you'd say is the heart and the rabbit hole of Workers and Resources Soviet Republic. That is it has a very massive modding community, and you can see I've got 39 pages of vehicles, plus on top I've actually got pages and pages of vehicles. And the reason I'm saying it's a rabbit hole is once you start using some of these mods, you won't look back. You just be collecting them ad infinitum. Now, at the moment, I've got it on none, so in preparation for this series. So if we click on a residence, what you'll see, you only get the base game. Buildings. If I now go back to there and switch favorites on. Now, favorites, if you look here, there's a yellow star. If you click on the right-hand column there, it will move it to the top. And what that will do is if we show you residences, what you'll see is that you got there, and if you want to add a new one, what you do is you just right click there and that gets added, and you can right click off to remove it. Now what you'll see here now is that all my favorites have been added to each building type. So if you've got a mod that you like to use a lot, and probably a good example of that is that there's a bit of a flaw in the game with respect to high voltage switches, and there's a couple of very good mods here which I use all the time. I very rarely actually use the vanilla one, and that is part of the addiction of the game. But when I'm digressing again, apologies. So that is the workshop there. I'll just put it back to none just to keep it simple. And then below we've got editor buildings, scripts, and time lapse. These are a couple of tools. Editor building is buildings that have been specifically built, but to be honest, when you first start now, you can just ignore that. So we've now got down the left-hand side of the screen. Now we're going to go to the right-hand side, and what you can do is hide the button, pin the button in position, And what you've got across the bottom here is a context sensitive menu. So you've got roads, rail, train, shops, ships, airplanes, cableways. It's when it says general cargo. What this does is it actually gives you options to do with forklifts, distribution offices, container loading facilities, and then rail, and all sorts of storage here. And again, this is an example. If I click on aggregate store, what you'll see here is you'll find that there's a series of aggregate stores here, but you can get to it in another different way. That's probably the best way to describe it. So I won't go through all these in great detail. So you've got aggregates, which is associated with chaos, liquids, which is pipelines, dry bulk, electricity. This is all where you'd go to put in your power stations, low voltage and high voltage. And then water, you can see is switched off for this series at the moment. So none of these icons are available. That also applies to heating here as well, because you get there. And then what you've got is residences and all the buildings associated with citizens as well. And then we got the state buildings, because crime's disabled, the police station and is also switched off. So you can't build buildings accidentally. That's probably the way to say it. Got related to tourism, trees and accessories. What I will draw your attention to is monuments. These are quite important when in the early game to getting your loyalty up. I doubt if you can see it, but the very small print at the bottom says government loyalty influence plus 4.5% for 90 meters. So that's quite an important thing that you need to deploy when you do your first building. Then at the end here, you've got the various industrial buildings grouped together. Food covers both the farming, food production, and also alcohol, which is a bit of a stretch, livestock farms, slaughterhouses, and meat storage. This one covers, or it's called miscellaneous, is cutting trees down to get woods and planks and making clothes. And again, so you've got gravel production here. So you've got a gravel quarry, gravel processing plant, cement. So what you've got here is construction. But when we move on, the next one is what they call fossil fuels. Now what you'll see here is there's a grayed out one over chemicals. That's because we haven't done the research for that yet. So chemical plants are not available, but it's not a big problem. And what you see now is where it's now got warehouses in here, small aggregate storage, large aggregate storage. Go back to here, we got the aggregate storage over here. And if we go to there, you can see the warehouse there. So this is where I was saying that you start to get the duplication. And that also applies to your steel industry, aluminium industry, and your storage here. And then what we got here, then what we got now is advanced industry, nuclear power, electronics. Again, these are all grayed out because we haven't researched them. We got a vehicle production line, railway production line, dry dock as well, and airplane production, and also space for vehicles with containers. As you may be starting to realize, is that it is theoretically possible in this game to build a completely self-sufficient society, but it can prove challenges. Now the final one is construction offices. You get the three types of construction office. You get the normal construction office, helicopter construction office, rail construction office. Then what we got is cement plants, prefabs, and again we got the duplication here as well. And you can see we got a wooden cutting post and sawmill down in here. So this is an example of the actual duplication that can occur in the game. Which one you want to use is totally up to you. They all do the same way. And what I will say is that as part of the changes in the Metro update, there are free buildings here, so you can actually put down a free construction office, and they are restricted by numbers, so you can't put down infinite ones, but the free buildings are really orientated towards when you play realistic mode, because in realistic mode you have to build everything. So if you don't have free buildings, you can't actually build anything because you can't build the first building. It's one of the quirks, but I won't go into that in this part. On the end here you have terrain tools, which is the usual raised terrain, lower terrain, level terrain, all that. Restore soil. You've got a measurement tool, which you can use to measure distances. But I will say it does have a little bit of a quirk in the fact that if you want to measure between two distances, and then you want to come here, what you'll see is it will always go back to that point. So you've got to get in the habit of clearing that. Measurement tool is quite useful when you're actually working on building placement. And you got says pick building and infrastructure. This is just a select one. What you've also got here is the ability to rename city areas, which is equivalent to the list buildings. Now you've got a clone tool in the game. What I will say is use it carefully, because if you try and clone a fairly large area, the game will put a lot of pressure on your machine. And you've also got pick buildings and infrastructure tool. To be honest, I've never used that, so I'm not exactly too sure what that is. Now we got demolish here, and what you'll see is that you can actually select, it says like demolish here. So again, this is a way of cancel taxiways and runways. I must admit, I've never used this as general purposes because it can be a little bit dangerous. When I delete things, I prefer to use these ones here, like cancel, because it's specific to roads, which is equivalent to that. But to be honest, this just seems a bit cumbersome. This one here, cancel taxiways. Again, you can move it, and again, what you've got here is a general demolish tool. Now, what I will say is don't use this unless you want to wipe out a whole area. This is quite a dangerous tool, and if you're not careful, especially if you're trying to just move, say, footpaths or roads, you can end up demolishing a lot more than what you actually hope that you originally planned. So yeah, don't use this unless you really want to wipe out a whole area, which I wouldn't recommend. But that's the way it goes. Of course, in the right hand corner we got the mini map, which I've already used. And if you haven't watched the previous video, if you want to see resources and kind of go around the map, you can actually pin the individual resources, drop down. Now above the mini map you've got a whole series of submenus which are context sensitive, and what I suggest is that what I'm going to do is not actually talk about this too much. But if you're interested, what this does is allow you to turn auto build on for rubles, dollars, and say don't auto build anything. Below here you've got a series of icons for the overlays, but to be honest, the easiest way to get to the overlays is F1 pressed once is the grid, and you can see down the bottom right hand it now ticks. Press F1 again. What this is actually is a snapping. So if I go, whoops, if I go round here, if I put a road, say we're going to build a road here, you can see it will just do that. If I press F1, what it will do is it will snap to the grid. That also applies to buildings as well. So if you come here, what you'll see, so if you're really into wanting to place buildings precisely, you can see the building will snap to the grid. If I press F1 off again, you've got free movement here, so you can treat the grid as a guide. And unfortunately, the only way you can get out is by pressing F1 twice. The F2 is the contour map. This is quite useful when you're trying to decide where to put a farm, because the fields need flat terrain to fit. It's also can be quite useful when you're actually doing leveling. If you're trying to remove a fairly large lump in the middle of there, you can actually see what you're doing. So now F3 is the underground view. So when you're laying pipes and heating pipes and sewers, you need that. Now F4 is I don't know what it is. It says near snap. Again, I don't really find that potentially as useful as maybe some people may find. Again, if you want to use it. So we finally got to the end of the video. Hope you found it useful. Hope you found it interesting. Any specific questions, feel free to chuck it in the comments. And in the next video, what we'll be doing is making a start on building our first economy. And that video will consist of two parts. The first one, I will go into a little bit more depth about this menu, and also some of the little tricks and things that you need to know when you're planning your first city. And then of course what we'll do is we'll actually get into and actually start to put something onto the map. So until next time, whatever you do, enjoy your gaming.